Book Talk begins at 8 minutes and 2 seconds.
Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania.
Episode 648. I'm going to have a drink. This episode of CraftLit is brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/craftlit. This week we would like to highlight Carla Marshall, Maria Roof, Linda Hayden, Leanne, Vicki Selleck, and, drumroll please, Drake, Steph Bowen, and Susan. Thank you all so much, and thank you so much to our new patrons. We could not do this without you. So hello there. I will explain the title of this episode at the end of this episode because it all ties in to the end. But first, I wanted to share with you a couple of things. Well, one of those things is I just sent out the postcards this morning for our patrons at the Marion Halcomb level. That is you get a postcard painted, usually painted, not always painted, but usually painted by me during the month that preceded. So these are the January postcards going out on January 30th. I'm very, very excited about that. Whew. So even though you're listening to this at the end of the week on February, if you're listening in real time, I'm recording on Tuesday. I was so excited. I tried something completely different with the postcards this week. So if you're watching on YouTube, you will see a picture of what they look like. And if you are looking at the show notes, you will see a picture of what they look like. So there, everybody wins. I was watching The Last Homely House, and I have to give Diane credit for this. Years ago, Diane told me to start watching The Last Homely House, which for people in America, we think of homely as being kind of a negative term, usually applied to women who are kind of plain. She looked homely. Homely in this sense is homey for us, something that is warm and makes you feel like you are at home and comfortable and loved and all of those good things. So on The Last Homely House, she did a New Year's Eve, New Year's Day split. And one of the things that she talked about was having made this little kind of a pencil pouch that she quilted out of this beautiful Indian block print fabric. It was made out of like a 15 by 15 square. And she put quilt wadding inside. She had a front, she had a back, quilted it, stitched it up, super easy. I thought I could make something like that for my aunt because she sent me a little charm pack of designer fabrics. These are not fabric colors that I ever would have chosen for myself, but here was this little charm pack and I thought, ooh, I can stitch those suckers together and then I can quilt that and then I can make this little roll-up bag. It was really easy to do. I will link out to the videos and I'll time code it so that you can just fast wind to the part that matters. The one thing that I did differently from the way she did it is I didn't stitch mine together first and then quilt it. I went kind of old school quilt, but I cut the backing fabric about 2 inches bigger just to give me some flexibility for quilting, because quilting shrinks up your fabric, but also to give me some flexibility as far as binding it goes. She didn't, because she had stitched it with right sides together and then turned it inside out, she didn't have to worry about binding. Because I was worried about the shrinkage issue, I went ahead and did it this way. I turned the corners badly, but I managed to turn the corners with this folded over binding process, which I can link out to a tutorial on so that you can do the edges better than I did. But then I turned it inside out to stitch the pieces together when you fold them up, kind of like a baby diaper, actually. when you fold them up, I stitched on the inside and I used kind of a ladder stitch so that I didn't lose any of that binding trim. And it came out so nicely. The one mistake I made, I think, I put on buttons to just kind of help with the closure situation, and I put them on way too tight, and I am not going to go back and redo those. That's just all there is to it. The other mistake that I made was I folded the strap that you wind around the bag. I folded that in half, and she was very specific to point out that you should have one side, let's say, a foot long, and the other end, when you folded it, like a foot and a half long. And the idea being that one of them is going to have to go around more and tie. That made sense to me. But before I really thought it through, I had already sewn this on. What would have been better if I had just laid that strap down, like, here's the roll, and then perpendicular to that, I put the strap on and have the short side go one way and the longer end go the other way, with the button making it clear that that's where the tie was going to tie. Because if you have them both aimed the same direction, then twisting the cord around means that you're going to be tying it going the same direction. I don't think this is making any sense at all, but I will put a picture of the problem on the show notes. Aside from that, I'm really happy with how it came out. It's adorable and cute and really useful. And one of the things that I really liked about Kate's version was, probably because her fabric was older and softer, it looked very easy to roll and bend. And of course, it also probably had something to do with the fact that hers is considerably older than mine is right now. But there was something very soft and welcoming about that. Like, if you've ever had access to a summer quilt, one that doesn't have very thick wadding on the inside or any wadding at all on the inside, they're very friendly, lightweight, easy. They feel very welcoming. There's the other side of the thicker, more profound quilts that are closer to a comforter, where there's a lot of oomph to that warming. This was not that. So it was interesting. I apologize if you can hear a heater in the background. That is literally my hand heater. I am in the basement recording. It is so freezing down here. I I was not going to be able to record because I couldn't click the mouse if I hadn't turned on this little tiny heater that I have on my desk. So I apologize if you can hear it, but you're happier hearing it in the background than having me not be able to click through and make this thing happen. So it did what it did. So that is all my craftiness for this week, because we are finishing the Three Musketeers today. And yes, at the end of this episode, I will tell you what our next book will be. But first, chapters 65, 66. Chapter 67 is both 67 and it's also called Conclusion. So 65, 66, a conclusion and the epilogue. There's not a lot that I want to say before we listen, except we know where this is going, right? We know that Athos went and found the man in the red cloak at the end of the last episode, and that was not going to be good for Milady at all. But even if you consider tying up that portion of the plot, there's still a lot of other loose ends that are hanging out. Just like the end of The Count of Monte Cristo, Dumas does some really interesting things here as well. And we're going to talk about that more on the flip side. But I think I said last week, and I'm going to say it again, this is perhaps another set of chapters to listen to without anything else particularly major going on. No vacuuming, no chance that people are going to come in and interrupt you. There's something about the running start here. I came very, very close to taking last week's two chapters and putting them together with this week's two chapters, and I finally decided that wouldn't work out practically. But that idea of kind of a running start is definitely what's going on in my mind when I'm thinking of these chapters. So we're kind of ramping up to the inevitable. But that's still, like I said, that leaves, okay, so if we take care of the Milady situation, we still have Constance is dead. We don't know what's going on with her husband. We have Richelieu. We have Rochefort. We have all sorts of drama and trauma. And the guys are supposed to be like on a holiday from Trevise's side of things. So there's a lot that needs to be dealt with. And Dumas is very good at tying up loose ends. So we can expect that those things will, in fact, get tied up, which is kind of nice. You don't have to worry that something's going to be hanging out at the end. That said, there is a German term that I want to make you aware of because I misheard it at first. It is Nachrichter, Nachrichter, not Nacht, night, Richter. Nachrichter, smashed together, all one word, is the person who comes after the judge. In this case, Nacht is night, Nach is after, and Richter is judge, which is kind of a weird word. And it's very close to Nachrichten, which is the word for news or message. And I can't see how they're connected. I mean, I can kind of monkey around and come up with some ideas about how they're connected, but someone who speaks German is going to have to weigh in on this. And you can at 206-350-1642, or you can email heather@craftlit.com or use our contact page, craftlit.com/contact. And let us know, like I said, over the next couple of weeks, send in your commentary about the Three Musketeers, and we'll put a compilation episode together of what all y'all thought about the book, which would make me very happy. Also, don't forget, as you're finishing books in your real life, please take that phone video and record a little message to send to us. We want to start compiling people's book commercials, basically book commercials, into, occasional videos or audio recordings that we upload. So make sure you give us your name, what state you're in if you want, and what the book is that you read and who wrote it so other people can find it, and let people know in just a couple minutes what it was that you liked about the book so much. I think it's one of the nicest things about the Zooms on Tuesdays and Thursdays is getting to hear what other people are reading, other people who like the same books that we like. Rarely a wrong step coming from CraftLit people. So those are those things. But Nachrichter, the person who comes after the judge. In the version of the audiobook that I listened to, the John Lee recording, which I've talked about before, this is using the Victorian translation. And you're going to hear the words, "I pardon you." And in the modern translation, the one by Richard Pevear, or Pevear, I've never known how to pronounce his name, but the modern translation, he uses the word forgive. I forgive you. So pardon is, in the modern translation, the word for forgive. Trade, in the old translation, is, in the modern one, profession. And debt, D-E-B-T, is, in the modern translation, duty. Those words are going to matter a lot in our second chapter today. And there's another different translation from that same section that I will read to you after. I don't want to spoil anything. There's a couple of nice digs at Louis XIII in today's chapters, which are always fun. And there's a reference to the House of the Lazarists, not the Lazarites, but the Lazarists. This was a congregation of priests, and I'm reading the footnote here. The congregation of priests of the mission founded in 1625 by St. Vincent de Paul. It was known as Lazarists because their center was in the College of St. Lazarus in Paris. So it doesn't have anything to do with raising people from the dead. It's just a monastery, a place that you could go to. That's all. You are going to hear a reference to a lot of money, 800,000 livres. Okay, I did my best to try and find out what the equivalency was, and all I can tell you is this. I found factually that in 1749, so fully 100 years after this, Voltaire was paid 80,000 francs per play, which equates to roughly $664,000 in US dollars today. Even if we just stick with that as our point of reference, 800,000 livres would have been a dumpster load of money. Like Jeff Bezos amounts of it would have been a lot. So I'm not sure that that translation of monetary fortitude is accurate. If you can find anywhere else online that talks about this, oh my gosh, I would love to know what you find. It's not that hard to find American dollar translations. It's not even that hard to find British pound translations. In fact, the Bank of Britain has a website where you can go in and put anything after like 1490 all the way up to now and get a decent translation on how much something cost or was worth or whatever. I could not find anything on livre or francs except for the one I told you. So if you've got something, please share. And I think that's it. I think that's everything that I wanted to give you guys before you listen. All right, so let's go ahead and listen to The End of the Three Musketeers, written by Alexandre Dumas. And if you are listening to your own version of this story, please fast wind up until 1 hour, 12 minutes, and 12 seconds. All right, here we go. Let's listen.
Chapter 65 of the D'Artagnan Romances, Volume 1, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, translated by William Robson. Trial. It was a stormy and dark night. Vast clouds covered the heavens, concealing the stars. The moon would not rise till midnight. Occasionally, by the light of a flash of lightning which gleamed along the horizon, the road stretched itself out before them, white and solitary. The flash extinct, all remained in darkness. Every minute Athos was forced to restrain D'Artagnan, constantly in advance of the little troop, and to beg him to keep in the line, which in an instant he again departed from. He had but one thought, to go forward, and he went. They passed in silence through the little village of Festubert, where the wounded servant was, and then skirted the wood of Richebourg. At Herlier-Planchet, who led the column, turned to the left. Several times Lord de Winter, Porthos, or Aramis tried to talk with the man in the red cloak, but to every interrogation which they put to him, he bowed without response. The travelers then comprehended that there must be some reason why the unknown preserved such a silence, and ceased to address themselves to him. The storm increased, the flashes succeeded one another more rapidly, the thunder began to growl, and the wind, the precursor of a hurricane, whistled in the plumes and the hair of the horsemen. The cavalcade trotted on more sharply. A little before they came to Fromelles, the storm burst. They spread their cloaks. There remained 3 leagues to travel, and they did it amid torrents of rain. D'Artagnan took off his hat, and could not be persuaded to make use of his cloak. He found pleasure in feeling the water trickle over his burning brow and over his body, agitated by feverish shudders. The moment the little troop passed Goskal and were approaching the post, a man sheltered beneath a tree detached himself from the trunk with which he had been confounded in the darkness, and advanced into the middle of the road, putting his finger to his lips. Athos recognized Grimaud. "What's the matter?" cried Athos. "Has she left Armentières?" Grimaud made a sign in the affirmative. D'Artagnan ground his teeth. "Silence, D'Artagnan," said Athos. "I have charged myself with this affair. It is for me, then, to interrogate Grimaud." "Where is she?" asked Athos. Grimaud extended his hands in the direction of the Lys. "Far from here?" asked Athos. Grimaud showed his master his forefinger bent. "Alone?" asked Athos. Grimaud made the sign yes. "Gentlemen," said Athos, "she is alone within half a league of us, in the direction of the river." "That's well," said D'Artagnan. "Lead us, Grimaud." Grimaud took his course across the country, and acted as guide to the cavalcade. At the end of 500 paces, more or less, they came to a rivulet, which they forded. By the aid of the lightning, they perceived the village of Erkenheim. "Is she there, Grimaud?" asked Athos. Grimaud shook his head negatively. "Silence, then!" cried Athos, and the troop continued their route. Another flash illuminated all around them. Grimaud extended his arm, and by the bluish splendor of the fiery serpent they distinguished a little isolated house on the banks of the river, within 100 paces of a ferry. One window was lighted. "Here we are," said Athos. At this moment a man who had been crouching in a ditch jumped up and came toward them. It was Mousqueton. He pointed his finger to the lighted window. "She is there," said he. "And Bazin?" asked Athos. "While I watched the window, he guarded the door." "Good," said Athos. "You are good and faithful servants." Athos sprang from his horse, gave the bridle to Grimaud, and advanced toward the window, after having made a sign to the rest of the troop to go toward the door. The little house was surrounded by a low, quickset hedge, 2 or 3 feet high. Athos sprang over the hedge and went up to the window, which was without shutters, but had the half curtains closely drawn. He mounted the skirting stone that his eyes might look over the curtain. By the light of a lamp he saw a woman, wrapped in a dark mantle, seated upon a stool near a dying fire. Her elbows were placed upon a mean table, and she leaned her head upon her 2 hands, which were white as ivory. He could not distinguish her countenance, but a sinister smile passed over the lips of Athos. He was not deceived. It was she whom he sought. At this moment a horse neighed. Milady raised her head, saw close to the panes the pale face of Athos, and screamed. Athos, perceiving that she knew him, pushed the window with his knee and hand. The window yielded. The squares were broken to shivers, and Athos, like the spectre of vengeance, leaped into the room. Milady rushed to the door and opened it. More pale and menacing than Athos, D'Artagnan stood on the threshold. Milady recoiled, uttering a cry. D'Artagnan, believing she might have means of flight, and fearing she should escape, drew a pistol from his belt, but Athos raised his hand. "Put back that weapon, D'Artagnan," said he. "This woman must be tried, not assassinated. Wait an instant, my friend, and you shall be satisfied. Come in, gentlemen." D'Artagnan obeyed, for Athos had the solemn voice and the powerful gesture of a judge sent by the Lord himself. Behind D'Artagnan entered Porthos, Aramis, Lord de Winter, and the man in the red cloak. The 4 lackeys guarded the door and the window. Milady had sunk into a chair with her hands extended, as if to conjure this terrible apparition. Perceiving her brother-in-law, she uttered a terrible cry. "What do you want?" screamed Milady. "We want," said Athos, "Charlotte Backson, who first was called Comtesse de la Fère, and afterwards Milady de Winter, Baroness of Sheffield." "That is I! That is I!" murmured Milady in extreme terror. "What do you want?" "We wish to judge you according to your crime," said Athos. "You shall be free to defend yourself. Justify yourself if you can. Monsieur d'Artagnan, it is for you to accuse her first." D'Artagnan advanced. "Before God and before men," said he, "I accuse this woman of having poisoned Constance Bonacieux, who died yesterday evening." He turned toward Porthos and Aramis. "We bear witness to this," said the 2 Musketeers, with one voice. D'Artagnan continued, "Before God and before men, I accuse this woman of having attempted to poison me in wine which she sent me from Villeroy, with a forged letter, as if that wine came from my friends. God preserved me, but a man named Brisemont died in my place." "We bear witness to this," said Porthos and Aramis, in the same manner as before. "Before God and before men, I accuse this woman of having urged me to the murder of the Baron de Wardes. But as no one else can attest the truth of this accusation, I attest it myself. I have done." And D'Artagnan passed to the other side of the room with Porthos and Aramis. "Your turn, my lord," said Athos. The baron came forward. "Before God and before men," said he, "I accuse this woman of having caused the assassination of the Duke of Buckingham." "The Duke of Buckingham assassinated?" cried all present with one voice. "Yes," said the baron, "assassinated. On receiving the warning letter you wrote to me, I had this woman arrested and gave her in charge to a loyal servant. She corrupted this man. She placed the poniard in his hand. She made him kill the duke. And at this moment, perhaps, Felton is paying with his head for the crime of this fury." A shudder crept through the judges at the revelation of these unknown crimes. "That is not all," resumed Lord de Winter. "My brother, who made you his heir, died in 3 hours of a strange disorder which left vivid traces all over the body. My sister, how did your husband die?" "Horror!" cried Porthos and Aramis. "Assassin of Buckingham, assassin of Felton, assassin of my brother, I demand justice upon you, and I swear that if it be not granted to me, I will execute it myself." And Lord de Winter ranged himself by the side of D'Artagnan, leaving the place free for another accuser. Milady let her head sink between her two hands and tried to recall her ideas, whirling in a mortal vertigo. "My turn," said Athos, himself trembling as the lion trembles at the sight of the serpent. "My turn. I married that woman when she was a young girl. I married her in opposition to the wishes of all my family. I gave her my wealth, I gave her my name, and one day I discovered that this woman was branded. This woman was marked with a fleur-de-lis on her left shoulder." "Oh," said Milady, raising herself, "I defy you to find any tribunal which pronounced that infamous sentence against me. I defy you to find him who executed it."
"Silence!"
said a hollow voice.
"It is for me to reply to that."
And the man in the red cloak came forward in his turn.
"What man is that? What man is that?"
cried Milady, suffocated by terror, her hair loosening itself and rising above her livid countenance as if alive. All eyes were turned toward this man, for to all except Athos he was unknown. Even Athos looked at him with as much stupefaction as the others, for he knew not how he could in any way find himself mixed up with the horrible drama then unfolded. After approaching Milady with a slow and solemn step, so that the table alone separated them, the unknown took off his mask. Milady for some time examined with increasing terror that pale face, framed with black hair and whiskers, the only expression of which was icy impassibility. Then she suddenly cried,
"Oh, no, no!"
rising and retreating to the very wall.
"No, no! It is an infernal apparition! It is not he! Help! Help!"
screamed she, turning toward the wall as if she would tear an opening with her hands. "Who are you, then?" cried all the witnesses of this scene.
"Ask that woman,"
said the man in the red cloak.
"For you may plainly see she knows me."
"The executioner of Lille! The executioner of Lille!" cried Milady, a prey to insensate terror, and clinging with her hands to the wall to avoid falling. Everyone drew back, and the man in the red cloak remained standing alone in the middle of the room. "Oh, grace, grace, pardon!" cried the wretch, falling on her knees. The unknown waited for silence, and then resumed.
"I told you well that she would know me. Yes, I am the executioner of Lille, and this is my history."
All eyes were fixed upon this man, whose words were listened to with anxious attention.
"That woman was once a young girl, as beautiful as she is today. She was a nun in the convent of the Benedictines of Temple Mar. A young priest, with a simple and trustful heart, performed the duties of the church of that convent. She undertook his seduction and succeeded. She would have seduced a saint. Their vows were sacred and irrevocable. Their connection could not last long without ruining both. She prevailed upon him to leave the country. But to leave the country, to fly together, to reach another part of France where they might live at ease, because unknown money was necessary. Neither had any. The priest stole the sacred vases and sold them. But as they were preparing to escape together, they were both arrested. 8 days later, she had seduced the son of the jailer and escaped. The young priest was condemned to 10 years of imprisonment and to be branded. I was executioner of the city of Lille, as this woman had said. I was obliged to brand the guilty one, and he, gentlemen, was my brother. I then swore that this woman who had ruined him, who was more than his accomplice since she had urged him to the crime, should at least share his punishment. I suspected where she was concealed. I followed her. I caught her. I bound her, and I imprinted the same disgraceful mark upon her that I had imprinted upon my poor brother. The day after my return to Lille, my brother in his turn succeeded in making his escape. I was accused of complicity, and was condemned to remain in his place till he should be again a prisoner. My poor brother was ignorant of this sentence. He rejoined this woman. They fled together into Berry, and there he obtained a little curacy. This woman passed for his sister. The lord of the estate on which the chapel of the curacy was situated saw this pretend sister, and became enamored of her, amorous to such a degree that he proposed to marry her. Then she quitted him. She had ruined for him. She was destined to ruin, and became the Comtesse de la Fère.
All eyes were turned toward Athos, whose real name that was, and who made a sign with his head that all was true which the executioner had said.
"Then,"
resumed he,
"mad, desperate, determined to get rid of an existence from which she had stolen everything, honor and happiness, my poor brother returned to Lille, and learning the sentence which had condemned me in his place, surrendered himself, and hanged himself that same night from the iron bar of the loophole of his prison. To do justice to them who had condemned me, they kept their word. As soon as the identity of my brother was proved, I was set at liberty. That is the crime of which I accuse her. That is the cause for which she was branded."
"Monsieur d'Artagnan," said Athos, "what is the penalty you demand against this woman?" "The punishment of death," replied D'Artagnan. "My Lord de Winter," continued Athos, "what is the penalty you demand against this woman?" "The punishment of death." replied Lord de Winter. "Messieurs Porthos and Aramis," repeated Athos, "you who are her judges, what is the sentence you pronounce upon this woman?" "The punishment of death," replied the Musketeers, in a hollow voice. Milady uttered a frightful shriek, and dragged herself along several paces upon her knees toward her judges. Athos stretched out his hand toward her. "Charlotte Backson, Comtesse de la Fère, Milady de Winter," said he, "your crimes have wearied men on earth and God in heaven. If you know a prayer, say it, for you are condemned, and you shall die." At these words, which left no hope, Milady raised herself in all her pride and wished to speak, but her strength failed her. She felt that a powerful and implacable hand seized her by the hair and dragged her away as irrevocably as fatality drags humanity. She did not, therefore, even attempt the least resistance, and went out of the cottage. Lord de Winter, D'Artagnan, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis went out close behind her. The lackeys followed their masters, and the chamber was left solitary, with its broken window, its open door, and its smoky lamp burning sadly on the table. Chapter 65. Chapter 66. Execution. It was near midnight. The moon, lessened by its decline, and reddened by the last traces of the storm, arose behind the little town of Armentières, which showed against its pale light the dark outline of its houses and the skeleton of its high belfry. In front of them the Lys rolled its waters like a river of molten tin, while on the other side was a black mass of trees, profiled on a stormy sky, invaded by large coppery clouds which created a sort of twilight amid the night. On the left was an old abandoned mill, with its motionless wings, from the ruins of which an owl threw out its shrill, periodical, and monotonous cry. On the right and on the left of the road, which the dismal procession pursued, appeared a few low, stunted trees, which looked like deformed dwarfs crouching down to watch men traveling at this sinister hour. From time to time, a broad sheet of lightning opened the horizon in its whole width, darted like a serpent over the black mass of trees, and like a terrible scimitar divided the heavens and the waters into two parts. Not a breath of wind now disturbed the heavy atmosphere. A death-like silence oppressed all nature. The soil was humid and glittering with the rain which had recently fallen, and the refreshed herbs sent forth their perfume with additional energy. Two lackeys dragged Milady, whom each held by one arm. The executioner walked behind them, and Lord de Winter, D'Artagnan, Porthos, and Aramis walked behind the executioner. Planchet and Bazin came last. The two lackeys conducted Milady to the bank of the river. Her mouth was mute, but her eyes spoke with their inexpressible eloquence, supplicating by turns each of those on whom she looked. Being a few paces in advance, she whispered to the lackeys, "1,000 pistoles to each of you, if you will assist my escape. But if you deliver me up to your masters, I have near at hand avengers who will make you pay dearly for my death." Grimaud hesitated. Mousqueton trembled in all his members. Athos, who heard Milady's voice, came sharply up. Lord de Winter did the same. "Change these lackeys," said he. "She has spoken to them. They are no longer sure." Planchet and Bazin were called and took the places of Grimaud and Mousqueton. On the bank of the river, the executioner approached Milady and bound her hands and feet. Then she broke the silence to cry out, "You are cowards, miserable assassins! 10 men combined to murder one woman! Beware! If I am not saved, I shall be avenged!" "You are not a woman," said Athos coldly and sternly. "You do not belong to the human species. You are a demon escaped from hell, whither we send you back again.
"Ah, you virtuous men," said Milady, "please to remember that he who shall touch a hair of my head is himself an assassin."
The executioner may kill, without being on that account an assassin,"
said the man in the red cloak, rapping upon his immense sword.
"This is the last judge. That is all. Nachrichter, as say our neighbors, the Germans."
And as he bound her while saying these words, Milady uttered 2 or 3 savage cries, which produced a strange and melancholy effect in flying away into the night and losing themselves in the depths of the woods.
"If I am guilty, if I have committed the crimes you accuse me of," shrieked Milady, "take me before a tribunal. You are not judges. You cannot condemn me."
"I offered you Tyburn," said Lord de Winter. "Why did you not accept it?"
"Because I am not willing to die," cried Milady, struggling. "Because I am too young to die."
"The woman you poisoned at Bethune was still younger than you, madame, and yet she is dead," said D'Artagnan.
"I will enter a cloister. I will become a nun,"
said Milady.
"You were in a cloister,"
said the executioner,
"and you left it to ruin my brother."
Milady uttered a cry of terror and sank upon her knees. The executioner took her up in his arms and was carrying her toward the boat.
"Oh, my God!"
cried she.
"My God! Are you going to drown me?"
These cries had something so heartrending in them that M. d'Artagnan, who had been at first the most eager in pursuit of Milady, sat down on the stump of a tree and hung his head, covering his ears with the palms of his hands, and yet, notwithstanding, he could still hear her cry and threaten. D'Artagnan was the youngest of all these men. His heart failed him.
"Oh, I cannot behold this frightful spectacle," said he. "I cannot consent that this woman should die thus."
Milady heard these few words and caught at a shadow of hope.
"D'Artagnan, D'Artagnan!" cried she, "remember that I loved you."
The young man rose and took a step toward her. But Athos rose likewise, drew his sword, and placed himself in the way. "If you take one step farther, D'Artagnan," said he, "we shall cross swords together." D'Artagnan sank on his knees and prayed. "Come," continued Athos, "executioner, do your duty."
"Willingly, monseigneur,"
said the executioner.
"For as I am a good Catholic, I firmly believe I am acting justly in performing my functions on this woman."
"That's well." Athos made a step toward Milady. "I pardon you," said he, "the ill you have done me. I pardon you for my blasted future, my lost honor, my defiled love, and my salvation forever compromised by the despair into which you have cast me. Die in peace." Lord de Winter advanced in his turn.
"I pardon you," said he, "for the poisoning of my brother and the assassination of his Grace, Lord Buckingham. I pardon you for the death of poor Felton. I pardon you for the attempts upon my own person. Die in peace." "And I," said M. d'Artagnan, "pardon me, madame, for having by a trick unworthy of a gentleman provoked your anger. And I, in exchange, pardon you the murder of my poor love, and your cruel vengeance against me. I pardon you, and I weep for you. Die in peace." "I am lost," murmured Milady in English. "I must die."
Then she arose of herself and cast around her one of those piercing looks which seemed to dart from an eye of flame. She saw nothing, she listened, and she heard nothing.
"Where am I to die?" said she.
"On the other bank,"
replied the executioner. Then he placed her in the boat, and as he was going to set foot in it himself, Athos handed him a sum of silver. "Here," said he, "is the price of the execution, that it may be plain we act as judges."
"That is correct,"
said the executioner.
"and now in her turn let this woman see that I am not fulfilling my trade, but my debt."
And he threw the money into the river. The boat moved off toward the left-hand shore of the Lys, bearing the guilty woman and the executioner. All the others remained on the right-hand bank, where they fell on their knees. The boat glided along the ferry rope under the shadow of a pale cloud which hung over the water at that moment. The troop of friends saw it gain the opposite bank. The figures were defined like black shadows on the red-tinted horizon. Milady, during the passage, had contrived to untie the cord which fastened her feet. On coming near the bank, she jumped lightly on the shore and took to flight. But the soil was moist. On reaching the top of the bank, she slipped and fell upon her knees. She was struck, no doubt, with a superstitious idea. She conceived that heaven denied its aid, and she remained in the attitude in which she had fallen, her head drooping and her hands clasped. Then they saw from the other bank the executioner raise both his arms slowly. A moonbeam fell upon the blade of the large sword. The two arms fell with a sudden force. They heard the hissing of the scimitar and the cry of the victim. Then a truncated mass sank beneath the blow. The executioner then took off his red cloak, spread it upon the ground, laid the body in it, threw in the head, tied all up by the four corners, lifted it on his back, and entered the boat again. In the middle of the stream he stopped the boat, and suspending his burden over the water, cried in a loud voice,
"Let the justice of God be done."
And he let the corpse drop into the depths of the waters, which closed over it. 3 days afterward, the four Musketeers were in Paris. They had not exceeded their leave of absence, and that same evening they went to pay their customary visit to Monsieur de Tréville.
"Well, gentlemen," said the brave captain, "I hope you have been well amused during your excursion."
"Prodigiously," replied Athos, in the name of himself and his comrades. End of chapter 66. Chapter 67. Conclusion. On the 6th of the following month, the king, in compliance with the promise he had made the cardinal to return to La Rochelle, left his capital still in amazement at the news which began to spread itself of Buckingham's assassination. Although warned that the man she had loved so much was in great danger, the queen, when his death was announced to her, would not believe the fact, and even imprudently exclaimed, "It is false! He has just written to me." But the next day she was obliged to believe this fatal intelligence. Laporte, detained in England, as everyone else had been, by the orders of Charles I, arrived, and was the bearer of the duke's dying gift to the queen. The joy of the king was lively. He did not even give himself the trouble to dissemble, and displayed it with affectation before the queen. Louis XIII, like every weak mind, was wanting in generosity. But the king soon again became dull and indisposed. His brow was not one of those that long remain clear. He felt that in returning to camp he should re-enter slavery. Nevertheless, he did return. The cardinal was for him the fascinating serpent, and himself the bird which flies from branch to branch without power to escape. The return to La Rochelle, therefore, was profoundly dull. Our four friends, in particular, astonished their comrades. They traveled together side by side, with sad eyes and heads lowered. Athos alone from time to time raised his expansive brow, a flash kindled in his eyes, and a bitter smile passed over his lips. Then, Like his comrades, he sank again into reverie. As soon as the escort arrived in a city, when they had conducted the king to his quarters, the four friends either retired to their own or to some secluded cabaret, where they neither drank nor played. They only conversed in a low voice, looking around attentively to see that no one overheard them. One day, when the king had halted to fly the magpie, and the four friends, according to their custom, instead of following the sport, had stopped at a cabaret on the high road, a man coming from La Rochelle on horseback pulled up at the door to drink a glass of wine, and darted a searching glance into the room where the four Musketeers were sitting.
"Holloa, Monsieur d'Artagnan,"
said he,
"is not that you whom I see yonder?"
D'Artagnan raised his head and uttered a cry of joy. It was the man he called his phantom. It was his stranger of Meung, of the Rue de Fossoyeurs, and of Arras. D'Artagnan drew his sword and sprang toward the door, but this time, instead of avoiding him, the stranger jumped from his horse and advanced to meet D'Artagnan. "Ah, monsieur," said the young man, "I meet you then at last. This time you shall not escape me."
"Neither is it my intention, monsieur, for this time I was seeking you. In the name of the king, I arrest you."
"How? What do you say?" cried D'Artagnan.
"I say that you must surrender your sword to me, monsieur, and that without resistance. This concerns your head. I warn you."
"Who are you, then?" demanded D'Artagnan, lowering the point of his sword, but without yet surrendering it.
"I am the Chevalier de Rochefort," answered the other, "the equerry of Monsieur the Cardinal Richelieu, and I have orders to conduct you to his Eminence."
"We are returning to his Eminence, Monsieur the Chevalier," said Athos, advancing, "and you will please to accept the word of Monsieur d'Artagnan that he will go straight to La Rochelle."
"I must place him in the hands of guards, who will take him into the camp."
"We will be his guards, monsieur, upon our word as gentlemen, but likewise upon our word as gentlemen," added Athos, knitting his brow, "Monsieur d'Artagnan shall not leave us." The Chevalier de Rochefort cast a glance backward, and saw that Porthos and Aramis had placed themselves between him and the gate. He understood that he was completely at the mercy of these four men.
"Gentlemen," said he, "if Monsieur d'Artagnan will surrender his sword to me and join his word to yours, I shall be satisfied with your promise to convey Monsieur d'Artagnan to the quarters of Monseigneur, the cardinal."
"You have my word, monsieur, and here is my sword."
"This suits me the better," said Rochefort, "as I wish to continue my journey."
"If it is for the purpose of rejoining Milady," said Athos coolly, "it is useless. You will not find her."
"What has become of her, then?"
said Rochefort eagerly. "Return to camp, and you shall know." Rochefort remained for a moment in thought. Then, as they were only a day's journey from Surgères, whither the cardinal was to come to meet the king, he resolved to follow the advice of Athos and go with them. Besides, this return offered him the advantage of watching his prisoner. They resumed their route. On the morrow, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they arrived at Surgères. The cardinal there awaited Louis XIII. The minister and the king exchanged numerous caresses, felicitating each other upon the fortunate chance which had freed France from the inveterate enemy who set all Europe against her. After which, the cardinal, who had been informed that D'Artagnan was arrested, and who was anxious to see him, took leave of the king, inviting him to come the next day to view the work already done upon the dike. On returning in the evening to his quarters at the bridge of La Pierre, the cardinal found, standing before the house he occupied, D'Artagnan, without his sword, and the three Musketeers, armed. This time, as he was well attended, he looked at them sternly, and made a sign with his eye and hand for D'Artagnan to follow him. D'Artagnan obeyed. "We shall wait for you, D'Artagnan," said Athos loud enough for the cardinal to hear him. His Eminence bent his brow, stopped for an instant, and then kept on his way without uttering a single word. D'Artagnan entered after the cardinal, and behind D'Artagnan the door was guarded. His Eminence entered the chamber which served him as a study, and made a sign to Rochefort to bring in the young Musketeer. Rochefort obeyed and retired. D'Artagnan remained alone in front of the cardinal. This was his second interview with Richelieu, and he afterward confessed that he felt well assured it would be his last. Richelieu remained standing, leaning against the mantelpiece. A table was between him and D'Artagnan. "Monsieur," said the cardinal, "you have been arrested by my orders." "So they tell me, monseigneur." "Do you know why?" "No, monseigneur, for the only thing for which I could be arrested is still unknown to your Eminence." Richelieu looked steadfastly at the young man. "Holloa," said he, "what does that mean?" "If monseigneur will have the goodness to tell me in the first place what crimes are imputed to me, I will then tell him the deeds I have really done." "Crimes are imputed to you which had brought down far loftier heads than yours, monsieur," said the cardinal. "What, monseigneur?" said D'Artagnan with a calmness which astonished the cardinal himself. "You are charged with having corresponded with the enemies of the kingdom. You are charged with having surprised state secrets. You are charged with having tried to thwart the plans of your general." "And who charges me with this, monseigneur?" said D'Artagnan, who had no doubt the accusation came from Milady. "A woman branded by the justice of the country, a woman who has espoused one man in France and another in England, a woman who poisoned her second husband, who attempted both to poison and assassinate me." "What do you say, monsieur?" cried the cardinal, astonished. "And of what woman are you speaking thus?" "Of Milady de Winter," replied D'Artagnan. "Yes, of Milady de Winter, of whose crimes your Eminence is doubtless ignorant, since you have honored her with your confidence." "Monsieur," said the cardinal, "if Milady de Winter has committed the crimes you lay to her charge, she shall be punished." "She has been punished, monseigneur." "And who has punished her?" "We." "She is in prison?" "She is dead." "Dead?" repeated the cardinal, who could not believe what he heard. "Dead? Did you not say she was dead?" "3 times she attempted to kill me, and I pardoned her. But she murdered the woman I loved. Then my friends and I took her, tried her, and condemned her." D'Artagnan then related the poisoning of Mme. Bonacieux in the convent of the Carmelites at Béthune, the trial in the isolated house, and the execution on the banks of the Lys. A shudder crept through the body of the cardinal, who did not shudder readily. But all at once, as if undergoing the influence of an unspoken thought, the countenance of the cardinal, till then gloomy, cleared up by degrees, and recovered perfect serenity. "So," said the cardinal in a tone that contrasted strongly with the severity of his words, "you have constituted yourself judges, without remembering that they who punish without license to punish are assassins." "Monseigneur, I swear to you that I never for an instant had the intention of defending my head against you. I willingly submit to any punishment your Eminence may please to inflict upon me. I do not hold life dear enough to be afraid of death." "Yes, I know you are a man of a stout heart, monsieur," said the cardinal, with a voice almost affectionate. "I can therefore tell you beforehand you shall be tried, and even condemned." "Another might reply to your Eminence that he had his pardon in his pocket. I content myself with saying, 'Command, monseigneur. I am ready.'" "Your pardon?" said Richelieu, surprised. "Yes, monseigneur," said D'Artagnan. "And signed by whom?" "By the king?" And the cardinal pronounced these words with a singular expression of contempt. "No, by your Eminence."
By me? You are insane, monsieur."
"Monseigneur will doubtless recognize his own handwriting." And D'Artagnan presented to the cardinal the precious piece of paper which Athos had forced from Milady, and which he had given to D'Artagnan to serve him as a safeguard. His Eminence took the paper and read in a slow voice, dwelling upon every syllable: "December 3rd, 1627. It is by my order and for the good of the state that the bearer of this has done what he has done. Richelieu." The cardinal, after having read these 2 lines, sank into a profound reverie, but he did not return the paper to D'Artagnan. "He is meditating by what sort of punishment he shall cause me to die," said the Gascon to himself. "Well, my faith, he shall see how a gentleman can die." The young Musketeer was in an excellent disposition to die heroically. Richelieu still continued thinking, rolling and unrolling the paper in his hands. At length he raised his head, fixed his eagle look upon that loyal, open, and intelligent countenance, read upon that face, furrowed with tears, all the sufferings its possessor had endured in the course of a month, and reflected for the 3rd or 4th time how much there was in that youth of 21 years before him, and what resources his activity, his courage, and his shrewdness might offer to a good master. On the other side, the crimes, the power, and the infernal genius of Milady had more than once terrified him. He felt something like a secret joy at being forever relieved of this dangerous accomplice. Richelieu slowly tore the paper which D'Artagnan had generously relinquished. "I am lost," said D'Artagnan to himself, and he bowed profoundly before the cardinal like a man who says, "Lord, thy will be done." The cardinal approached the table, and without sitting down, wrote a few lines upon a parchment of which 2/3 were already filled, and affixed his seal. "That is my condemnation," thought D'Artagnan. "He will spare me the ennui of the Bastille or the tediousness of a trial. That's very kind of him." "Here, monsieur," said the cardinal to the young man, "I have taken from you one carte blanche to give you another. The name is wanting in this commission. You can write it yourself." D'Artagnan took the paper hesitatingly, and cast his eyes over it. It was a lieutenant's commission in the Musketeers. D'Artagnan fell at the feet of the cardinal. "Monseigneur," said he, "my life is yours. Henceforth dispose of it, but this favor which you bestow upon me I do not merit. I have 3 friends who are more meritorious and more worthy." "You are a brave youth, D'Artagnan," interrupted the cardinal, tapping him familiarly on the shoulder, charmed at having vanquished this rebellious nature. "Do with this commission what you will. Only remember, though the name be blank, it is to you I give it." "I shall never forget it," replied D'Artagnan. "Your Eminence may be certain of that." The cardinal turned and said in a loud voice, "Rochefort!" The chevalier, who no doubt was near the door, entered immediately. "Rochefort," said the cardinal, "you see Monsieur d'Artagnan. I receive him among the number of my friends. Greet each other, then, and be wise if you wish to preserve your heads." Rochefort and D'Artagnan coolly greeted each other with their lips, but the cardinal was there, observing them with his vigilant eye. They left the chamber at the same time. "We shall meet again, shall we not, monsieur?" "When you please," said D'Artagnan. "An opportunity will come," replied Rochefort. "Hey!" said the cardinal, opening the door. The 2 men smiled at each other, shook hands, and saluted his Eminence. "We were beginning to grow impatient," said Athos. "Here I am, my friends," replied D'Artagnan, "not only free, but in favor." "Tell us about it." "This evening, but for the moment let us separate." Accordingly, that same evening D'Artagnan repaired to the quarters of Athos, whom he found in a fair way to empty a bottle of Spanish wine, an occupation which he religiously accomplished every night. D'Artagnan related what had taken place between the cardinal and himself, and drawing the commission from his pocket, said, "Here, my dear Athos, this naturally belongs to you." Athos smiled with one of his sweet and expressive smiles. "Friend," said he, "for Athos this is too much. For the Comte de la Fère it is too little. Keep the commission, it is yours. Alas, you have purchased it dearly enough." D'Artagnan left Athos's chamber and went to that of Porthos. He found him clothed in a magnificent dress, covered with splendid embroidery, admiring himself before a glass.
"Aha! Is that you, my dear friend?"
exclaimed Porthos.
"How do you think these garments fit me?"
"Wonderfully," said D'Artagnan, "but I have come to offer you a dress which will become you still better."
"What?"
asked Porthos. "That of a lieutenant of Musketeers." D'Artagnan related to Porthos the substance of his interview with the cardinal, and said, taking the commission from his pocket, "Here, my friend, write your name upon it, and become my chief." Porthos cast his eyes over the commission, and returned it to D'Artagnan, to the great astonishment of the young man.
"Yes,"
said he,
"yes, that would flatter me very much. But I should not have time enough to enjoy the distinction. During our expedition to Bethune, the husband of my duchess died. So, my dear, the coffer of the defunct holding out its arms to me, I shall marry the widow. Look here, I was trying on my wedding suit. Keep the lieutenancy, my dear, keep it."
The young man then entered the apartment of Aramis. He found him kneeling before a prie-dieu, with his head leaning on an open prayer book. He described to him his interview with the cardinal, and said for the third time, drawing his commission from his pocket, "You, our friend, our intelligence, our invisible protector, accept this commission. You have merited it more than any of us by your wisdom and your counsels, always followed by such happy results."
"Alas, dear friend," said Aramis, "our late adventures have disgusted me with military life. This time my determination is irrevocably taken. After the siege, I shall enter the house of the Lazarists. Keep the commission, D'Artagnan. The profession of arms suits you. You will be a brave and adventurous captain."
D'Artagnan, his eye moist with gratitude, though beaming with joy, went back to Athos, whom he found still at table contemplating the charms of his last glass of Malaga by the light of his lamp. "Well," said he, "they likewise have refused me." "That, dear friend, is because nobody is more worthy than yourself." And he took a quill, wrote the name of D'Artagnan in the commission, and returned it to him. "I shall then have no more friends," said the young man. "Alas, nothing but bitter recollections." And he let his head sink upon his hands, while two large tears rolled down his cheeks. "You are young," replied Athos, "and your bitter recollections have time to change themselves into sweet remembrances." End of chapter 67. Epilogue. La Rochelle, deprived of the assistance of the English fleet and of the diversion promised by Buckingham, surrendered after a siege of a year. On the 28th of October, 1628, the capitulation was signed. The king made his entrance into Paris on the 23rd of December of the same year. He was received in triumph as if he came from conquering an enemy and not Frenchmen. He entered by the Faubourg Saint-Jacques under verdant arches. D'Artagnan took possession of his command. Porthos left the service, and in the course of the following year married Madame Coquenard. The coffer so much coveted contained 800,000 livres. Mousqueton had a magnificent livery, and enjoyed the satisfaction of which he had been ambitious all his life, that of standing behind a gilded carriage. Aramis, after a journey into Lorraine, disappeared all at once and ceased to write to his friends. They learned at a later period through Madame de Chevreuse, who told it to 2 or 3 of her intimates, that yielding to his vocation, he had retired into a convent, only into which nobody knew. Bazin became a lay brother. Athos remained a Musketeer under the command of D'Artagnan till the year 1633, at which period, after a journey he made to Touraine, he also quit the service under the pretext of having inherited a small property in Roussillon. Grimaud followed Athos. D'Artagnan fought 3 times with Rochefort and wounded him 3 times. "I shall probably kill you the 4th," said he to him, holding out his hand to assist him to rise. "It is much better, both for you and for me, to stop where we are," answered the wounded man. "Corbleu! I am more your friend than you think, for after our very first encounter, I could, by saying a word to the cardinal, have had your throat cut." They this time embraced heartily, and without retaining any malice. Planchet obtained from Rochefort the rank of sergeant in the Piedmont regiment. M. Bonacieux lived on very quietly, wholly ignorant of what had become of his wife, and caring very little about it. One day he had the imprudence to recall himself to the memory of the cardinal. The cardinal had him informed that he would provide for him, so that he should never want for anything in the future. In fact, M. Bonacieux, having left his house at 7 o'clock in the evening to go to the Louvre, never appeared again in the Rue des Fossoyeurs. The opinion of those who seemed to be best informed was that he was fed and lodged in some royal castle at the expense of his generous Eminence. End of the epilogue.
So, the reason I called this episode "I'm Going to Have a Drink" is the end of The Untouchables, written by David Mamet. My husband Andrew and I have always felt like they got the ending of this wrong. Sean Connery's death was horrible in that. I mean, it was very David Mamet, right? It was just awful in that movie, and it hurt. And the scene right before this one is melancholy and referring to Sean Connery's death. It is just rough. And this line from Eliot Ness just sounded so tone deaf to us.
I just happened to be there when the wheel went round.
They say they're going to repeal prohibition. What will you do then?
I think I'll have a drink.
And to me, this just undermined all of the sacrifices. There were so many good guys. And I know it's a movie, blah, 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 but they lost so many good guys in such horrible ways. Capone was such a louse. And "I'm going to go have a drink" just seemed so wrong and so tone deaf. And I felt like John Lee, who never hit a word wrong in the translation that I was listening to, in the audiobook version that I was listening to, did the same thing that Kevin Costner and the director did at the end of chapter 66 on my version. When they come back, Milady is gone, their duty has been performed, and Trevi's so happy to see them. "Hey, did you guys have a great time?" And Athos says, "Prodigiously." John Lee says it happy. I don't think Dumas meant that to be happy. Dumas' language all the way through these chapters I found really interesting. There were lots and lots of juxtapositions, places where he put one word next to another very purposefully and with meaning, like resonant meaning. the executioner who beheads Milady unclasps the cloak, places it on the ground, places her body on the cloak, and throws her head in. Every translation uses the word throws. To me, that's so harsh. I mean, I know it's a dead body now, whatever, whatever. I can't help feeling that that is not an accidental word choice on Dumas' part. So there were moments like that. I have to say, I kept thinking, why is he wearing a red cloak? That's kind of a little obvious, right? I mean, he's like going to stick out in public. And the whole thing was seemed to be trying to live a life where nobody knew where he was or what he was up to in kind of the quiet, strange neighbor who you never speak to. And then he's got this red cloak. And once, of course, he puts Milady's body and head into it, I went, oh, right, because blood. And then he threw everything in the lake. The exchange of money beforehand, I thought was very interesting too. And I'm not entirely sure that I'm not missing something here. So please feel free to chime in if you hear some other resonance in here than the one I'm picking up on. But the executioner is taking Milady, putting her in the boat, and Athos hands him a sum of money and says, and I'm reading from the modern translation now. Here he said, "This is the price of the execution. Let it be plainly seen that we are acting as judges." So they're not doing this for sport. They're not doing it for fun. This is a transaction for the purpose of justice. The executioner then says, "Very well, and now let this woman know in her turn that I am not carrying out my profession, but my duty." In the old Victorian translation, it's "I'm not fulfilling my trade, but my debt." I don't think we haven't come across a whole lot of books that we've worked through where there are executions like this one. But I found this to be so fascinating, like, especially after we just had, was it last night, the night before, a gentleman in Alabama who was put to death using a technique that nobody'd ever used before on an execution, and it did not go well, from what I understand. And I am horrified. Where's the French longswordsman when you need them? But all the way through the trial, with all of the men stepping forward and saying, "I pardon you," or in the modern version, "I forgive you. I forgive you for having done all of these things. I'm not doing this execution thing out of hatred, out of vengeance, out of anger, out of passion. These are things you did that were wrong. You will not stop. You haven't stopped yet. People have tried to stop you. You keep breaking things and people, and we got nothing left. You haven't given us any way to think that this is not going to keep happening." I thought that was very interesting. And it reminded me a lot of the end of Count of Monte Cristo. For those of you who have not listened to the Count of Monte Cristo, you may want to skip ahead a little bit. But for those of you who did listen to the Count of Monte Cristo, you remember about, well, it wasn't 2/3 of the way, maybe 3/4 of the way through the book, I started saying, I'm starting to get kind of uncomfortable with what he's doing to Danglars and all of the many means of revenge that the Count was pulling to give payback to the guys who ruined his life. And at a certain point, especially when the kids were involved, you start going, I am not seeing an equivalency any longer. This is starting to get uncomfortable. I don't think Dumas can help himself. I think you've got the same thing happening here. It's like, yes, we've had all the swashbuckling. Yes, we've had all the rollicking good times. Yes, D'Artagnan is a lot of fun. And Milady's a marvelous villain. And the Three Musketeers, when they are on their game, are adorable together and very, very funny. And they're charming. And they all have their little goofy bugaboos that they have to live with, whether it's the no, I'm going to be religious, except let me go talk to my girlfriend, or I have to look like I am wearing a fortune in fabric except don't look at the back of my shirt because it's cardboard. They're fun. They're fun guys. It's not fun anymore at the end of this. And I just think Dumas didn't have an easy life. I don't think he could. Well, honestly, I don't think we'd remember his books if he gave us an easy ending, if he gave us kind of a Tom Cruise ending. And Tom Cruise actually, that brings something up to me. At the end, in the conclusion, when D'Artagnan is taking the paper from Richelieu and going person to person, Athos, you deserve this. Okay, Aramis, you deserve, okay, Porthos, you deserve this. And they're all like, no, 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 no. I got my own thing. They're all passing up this promotion. And it made me think of Maverick in the last Top Gun movie. It's like, how many times have they tried to promote this guy out of this position? And he keeps saying, no, I don't want that. Is it, I don't want the responsibility, or it's not fun for me anymore? Either way, Athos stays working for D'Artagnan for another 8 years, which I also thought was interesting. And of course, there are more books with these characters in them. So if you do the Four Musketeers, we are not going to do it on the podcast, at least not right now, but there's Four Musketeers. There's, I mentioned Man in the Iron Mask last year. There's 20 years later. Then there's several others that are all tied into kind of the D'Artagnan universe. I haven't read any of those, but I am fascinated by the idea of how you pick up after this. Like, how much time do you have to give the characters to recover before you try and have another adventure? I also loved Dumas' line about Louis XIII, like every weak mind was wanting in generosity. Ouch. In the modern translation, it was interesting. It's all weak hearts are lacking in generosity. It's an interesting change, right? I did not go look this up in the French, but there's a huge difference between a weak mind, dumb folks aren't very generous, and a weak heart. Those who have no empathy are rarely generous. I would be fascinated. Alix, let us know what the original French was. It's on the very first page of the conclusion, just so you know. I also wrote down, there's a quote from Milady. She said, "You virtuous men, making your case against me here where I am alone. I have no way of defending myself, but you virtuous men." I mean, you can just hear like the venom virtuous thing going on in her mouth. It's great. It also 100% reminds me of the witch in Into the Woods. The "you're so nice. You're not good, you're not bad, you're just nice. I'm not good, I'm not nice, I'm just right." It's like, you virtuous. Bleh. Dumas can't not give her some great lines, and she, boy, chews them up, doesn't she? There is also the Milady's like, "Look, I'll enter a convent, okay? I'll go to a cloister. Just let me go, and I will take myself out of the game for realsies now, guys." And it totally reminded me. I actually laughed out loud when I heard her say that, and I was like, oh my God, this is just like Judi Dench as Queen Elizabeth in Shakespeare in Love, the "too late, too late." There are two quotes from movies that come from Time Gone By. One is that one where I feel like it's cultural shorthand, like just going "too late, too late." Anybody who remembers Shakespeare in Love has a good opportunity of remembering that, and just how funny that was. Like, you're waiting for people to do the right thing, and when they finally do, you've already started doing the thing that they were supposed to do in the first place. The other one is in Amadeus, when the emperor is trying to explain why he is supposed to not like Mozart's music, and finally settles on too many notes. And when we were talking about a weak mind wanting in generosity, I often think about like a weak mind wanting in appreciation of things. Too many notes. Mozart. And the last thing I wanted to bring up, of course, is Rochefort. All right, guys who listen, you have got to fill me in on this. I I have no concept, a frame of reference for D'Artagnan's relationship with Rochefort. I don't understand how they kind of make peace, but then they fight each other 3 or 4 times over and over. And then finally at the end, they just like hug it out. There's no malice. There's no anger. Nah, I got nothing. I don't understand that mindset at all. I mean, I appreciate that it happens. I kind of like that it happens, but emotionally, I don't get that. Is it just a rules thing? Like they played by the rules and they kept playing by the rules until the rules stopped mattering anymore? Like they got past it? I don't, I need help. I just do. But I also thought that the vibe of the whole book at the end reminded me very much of Camelot at the end of Camelot the musical, but also at the end of The Once and Future King and all of the Arthurian legends. There's a sense of melancholy. There's also a sense of our best days are behind us, whether it's because we were young or because things were better, qualified better, however you want, or just that we can't stay having a rollicking good time, swashbuckling our way, buckling our swashes as we go. You can't keep it up forever. And that puts you kind of in a nostalgic frame. But that's also one of the places where I felt like that Eliot Ness line reading, the one that should have been the I'm going to have a drink. Because the last chunk of text is about Bonancieux. What a punk he was. And a dope. And at first, the last 2 paragraphs, the first of those last 2 paragraphs, Monsieur Bonancieux lived on quite peacefully, perfectly unaware of what had become of his wife and hardly worrying about it. What a jack. I mean, that drove me nuts. And then he reminds Richelieu of his existence. Richelieu says he would see to it that henceforth he, Bonancieux, lacked for nothing. And I'm going to read you the modern version. Indeed, the next day, Monsieur Bonancieux, having left his house at 7 o'clock in the evening to go to the Louvre, never reappeared again on the Rue de Fosilleur. The opinion of those who seemed best informed was that he was being housed and fed in some royal castle at the expense of his generous eminence. And I thought, oh, he's not being housed and fed. He's feeding the lilies, but he is no longer with us. And again, he's a punk. I mean, he's a complete and utter dope. But these stories come with some level of brutality, and you can feel satisfied, but it's complicated, right? And I think it's supposed to be complicated. I think if it weren't complicated at the end, if we didn't have mixed feelings about it at the end, it would not have lasted as long as it has. So what are we going to listen to next? Next, we are going to listen to Emma by Jane Austen. And before you say, oh my God, I hate that book, because I know some of you do, trust me on this. We need some Austen. It's time for Emma. I will not make it hurt. I promise. As much as I can. So there's that. And to leave you with another happy thing before I send you off on your way, we have a voicemail from Anne Blanton. The way I was talking last week about Dumas' names of characters being really quite Dickensian in some ways. She has a very funny Dickens story that I did not know, but that just made me smile. And I thought, I'm going to save this for the end of this episode so that y'all can enjoy it too. So I am going to let Anne take us out. You take care of yourself. I will talk to you soon. If you have not signed up for the newsletter, we now have a newsletter that we can put out regularly. When Emma will begin will be announced there. It will be announced on our Patreon page, and it will be announced in the Facebook CraftLit group. So I will let you know when we're going to start that book. I have to tell you, I have found some amazing books about Jane Austen and Jane Austen's era that totally rocked my world. So I'm going to be spending some heavy duty time diving into Austen herself. And yeah, Emma. So it shouldn't be too long. I am less foggy than I was. I can do a couple hours of screen time a day now, and I can read for half an hour before my head starts to hurt. So I'm going to go get back to that. You take care. Have a good one. Here's Anne. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Hello, Heather. This is Ann Blanton. I was just listening to episode 647, and you said something about Dumas and his love of, or habit of using people's names, real people's names, and just because he liked the names. And it reminded me of something that I read years ago in a biography of Charles Dickens. And Charles Dickens would, when he was in a, he loved to walk. He loved long walks. And one of the things he would do would be to go up to people's letterboxes to see what the names were. And if he liked the names, he would use the name or a combination of that name with another name for one of his characters. And more than once, he got in trouble because people thought it was creepy that this person they didn't know was walking around their neighborhood, coming up and looking at their letterboxes. And, you know, the constables would be summoned, and they would come, and Dickens would explain who he was. Ha, ha, ha. Wasn't this such a joke? So anyway, I just thought that was an interesting coincidence, similarity, we'll use that, between Dumas and Dickens. I know there are lots of others, but we won't go into that. So anyway, have a great day. Talk to you later. Bye.
If you like what we do here, please consider liking and subscribing on iTunes, thumbs upping and subscribing on YouTube. You can visit patreon.com/craftlit and become a patron of this art. And you can always go to Linktree, linktr.ee/craftlit channel. And from there, you can get links out to all of the social media, all of the places that CraftLit lives. It's a nice hub that you can go to get all the stuff, all the good stuff. And I keep forgetting to mention, we also have a Facebook group with the loveliest people, as you might imagine. They're just awesome, makers and readers, and people who hadn't been readers before, but are now. I like that. All right, you take care of yourself. Have a great one. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.